Farming in video games. No, not that kind. Farming is pretty easy to narrow down as a definition, but you know it intuitively. Farming, grinding, treadmilling, tr- treadmilling? Uh, okay, Wikipedia. If you've played a game before, chances are you've experienced a form of grind. Maybe to get better gear, maybe to increase your level, maybe to get money, but doing some repetitive task over and over and over again for some resource is grinding. Arguably, every game is grindy, particularly if there is a form of endgame, but you could also argue that Mario or any other game with level after level is also a grind, but I wouldn't. I mean, it's called a game loop after all, but I don't think that's useful for talking about the negative parts of grinding, so we'll just stay away from that for now. Also, for the sake of this video, grinding is the same as farming, and farming is the same as treadmilling. The core of doing a repetitive task is still there. I don't care if farming is to get an item or whatever. It's still doing the repetitive task and wasting your time in the medium that is used to waste time, but it's still wasting your time. There are technically a couple of different types of grinding, which I do think is helpful to know, and also something you likely haven't thought about. So there's optional grinding, a grind that's optional, but it gives you a bonus. Things like side quests or level farming in a game that particularly doesn't have level gates, so to speak. Then you have regular grinding, games that revolve around grinding like Borderlands 2 or almost every MMO, and you also have inactive grinding, which is when a game lets you kind of AFK and not be at your computer. So things like Minecraft or even Factorio are good examples of this. Now, I'm pretty sure you can think of a game fitting in these definitions that you like, but usually we look down on grinding. So, what makes these games so different? Why is Minecraft a game that has lasted through generations, but New World is a game in a genre revolving around grinding, but it died off in popularity in a week or so? Well, it's because it didn't respect your time as a player, but we'll get to that. The bigger question is, why do games do farming? So, when is it used? I think there are kind of two parts to this question. When do we use it as players, and when do game developers use it? We, as players, do it for two active reasons, and one more that I'll talk about later, but it's much less important in my opinion, so we'll stick to these two for now. Risk minimization, to make sure that we don't lose an encounter, and distractive, to waste your time, to get away from the real world, whatever reason you may have. Both are absolutely valid as reasons to grind as each other. One is optimizing the fun out of a video game, the other is wasting your time with a video game, both of which encapsulate the reason why people play video games on a broad scale, and make sense evolutionarily, given our overdependence on tools and fear of the unknown as a species, which I think is pretty cool to note. Now, why do game developers implement grindy mechanics? The short answer is to keep you playing, but the slightly longer answer is to give players the illusion of progress while you're making real skill progress. Some good examples of this is your hunter rank in Monster Hunter and your player level in Deep Rock. Eye levels in games like Final Fantasy, World of Warcraft, Destiny, particularly in the late game where your item level goes up by such a small amount every week or so, you aren't really making huge leaps and bounds, but you are getting slightly stronger every time you play, which is important, even if it's artificial. I'll use Monster Hunter as a prime example to elaborate further. You are always building skill in Monster Hunter. Every fight you do gets you slightly better at the game, even past the max hunter rank. If you focus on getting better and are really mindful about your playstyle, Monster Hunter is incredibly satisfying to see your skill progress. But that is harder to measure than a bar filling up. So Capcom gave us a bar filling up for an absurdly long time. It starts as the reason why you grind, but then your actual skill progress becomes the main focus, which is true of most of the other games that I have listed here. Your actual skill as an individual player is really impactful in these games. Not using carts for your team in Monster Hunter, using your tools and playing your class correctly in Deep Rock, not failing raid mechanics in MMOs. The grind facilitates skill improvement, which is why, despite being so grind heavy, these games are absolutely adored or obsessed over by their fan bases, and have stood the test of time thanks to their grind. These games have grinds, but good grinds. Not many people complain about these games, and if they do, it's because a system is bad, not the grind itself. Luck-based drops are the biggest one, particularly of the daily, weekly, and monthly allowance variety, where the player is not able to keep grinding in an attempt to get the drop if they slow choose. But other games have grinds that, in and of themselves, players consider bad. Chances are that as a player of a game that is grind heavy, you don't care much about your time, and many games know this. It's a low bar to entry. Games like old school RuneScape take thousands of hours to max out a character, and people adore its pure, grind heavy, poorly modeled gameplay. But there are games that you would think get a pass, like the aforementioned New World, but don't, which I will explain. When New World was released, it had a lot of problems. Bots were rampant, the UI and gameplay was buggy, it had no party finder, the combat scaled poorly, there was only one support class, the most fun game mode was most PvP items, but you had to absolutely experience there were combat felt buggy, and certain skills whole variety of enemies. But its worst sin was not respecting player time. It took so many hours to level up your respective gathering and crafting skills, and your reward was essentially world drops worth of gear. They reworked the skills to be less grindy, but it was far too late by then. Even traveling between places used a limited resource, so you spent most of your time running to and from major cities, and they, at the time, said they weren't going to introduce mounts because of lore reasons. It was such a waste of potential, all because they wanted to draw out a relatively meaningless part of the game to pad content essentially. Asman did a really good video on this as well, and he also spoke a lot more about the intricate mechanics of the game that he had issues with. It's quite a long watch, but he, as a player of MMOs, more or less full-time, felt like the grind was bad because it didn't expect players' time. Players, as I mentioned before, don't respect their own time. That's why we play games. But if we're bored of a game, we're more likely to be critical. Making us do the same thing to an extreme extent is something we're eventually going to get pissed at. Another game with an awful grind is Payday 3, but it's awful for a different reason. It forces you to do things you don't want to, and it's also always online, and it was a really buggy game. I'm not doing that again. You get the point. The main reason is, currently you are forced to play the game with every weapon, in a game that's built around player choice. You are rewarded for not completing heists, but for grinding headshots or ranged kills. This is set to be addressed in Operation Medic Bag, but I kind of feel it's too late. Payday 3 kind of fumbled the bag at the start line, so it's really difficult to root for it, particularly in its current state. Looking at these examples, I think it's pretty clear to see that the core grind of your game needs two aspects: variety, so that the player doesn't get bored of what they're doing, and reward, so the player is pleased that what they are doing is being acknowledged. Remember when I mentioned before the other reason why gamers grind? It was like probably about 6 minutes ago, so you might not remember. The answer was, it was habit. We log into games and do what we need to do, not thinking about it as a grind, and not even caring about wasting our time. This is the holy grail for game developers, a fan base of gamer boys and gamer girls who eat their slop without questioning. This isn't actually a bad thing. It means the grind was in some way meaningful to the player. Maybe it's to make progress on a game you play with friends. Maybe it's because you enjoyed the core grind and now it's a comfort thing for you. Whatever the reason may be, this is fine, I think, particularly when done in moderation. My original ending for this video was really unsatisfying. I kind of pointed out that game developers should be careful when implementing grinds, and we as players should call out a bad grind, which I do think is true, but I don't think it's very helpful. So I feel that grinding as a gamer is a way that we actually avoid skill progression a lot of the time. And that's the whole point for a lot of us, right? That's at least the reason why I play video games, to get a little bit better every day, to at least feel a sense of progress. So I want to urge you, as a player of games, to be careful that you are actually making progress, that you aren't just artificially boosting a number, and that you are getting better at a game. And I think your gameplay experience will be all the more better for it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got to go tend the fields.